Hello, class, and welcome to This Week in Developmental Psychology. My name is Dr. Neil Soggie, and this week we're going to be exploring a little bit of early childhood development. And what I'd like to do this week is start off by sharing with you some wonderful portraits of myself from some little friends that I received earlier on this week. One of them is from Nora, who is 3 years old, and the other one is from Addie, who is 5 years old. And what I want you to focus on is some of the unique characteristics that are portrayed in how you might imagine that I look. Now, the reason why I want to share this is that children go through developmental stages when they are learning art and learning creativity. And it helps them to hone their building skills and explore their creativity. And once a child figures out that they can make something and represent something with squiggles, they embark on what we call the pre-schematic stage of art. And what this is, essentially, is the child begins to emerge in drawing figures, and these figures will often look like potato shapes with stick arms and legs. And might not seem like much, but these are the first representations of people. And I think it's important that we encourage children to draw and engage in their cognitive and creative endeavors, but it goes to show just how different children think than adults in their perception of the world and how the world is represented. Now, there's a researcher by the name of Victor Lowenfeld who wrote a book called The Creative and Mental Growth, who describes this pre-schematic stage, the kind of pre-operational stage, as a time when the schema, that is the visual idea, is being developed. And this is where a child between the age of around 3 through to 7 creates drawings that depict an object as they view it and form it in a way that basically represents what is important to the child. So a child exploring this pre-schematic stage doesn't have a full understanding of the dimension and size of objects. And so the child may draw a person as a blob. The child may draw a person as tall as a house, and as you'll see, the child may draw a person with a neck that's 3 feet long. And what they're doing is combining color and emotion and expressing a desire for creativity, but not having a full sense of proportion and perspective. And within this pre-schematic stage, artwork resembles, as I mentioned, blobs or amoebas, and shapes are not anything more than a general representation. If there's a mouth, then it will typically have a large smile or a large face, very long arms or maybe very short arms and legs. And just don't be alarmed, I guess, by the exaggerated features that may be there. It is a case of expressing something that is important to the person. And in one of the drawings, you'll see that there are some somewhat heart-shaped features. And really what one of the children was doing in the drawing was just expressing their love and care for me, which I think is just wonderfully sweet. And it really kind of displays a normal, healthy development, but recognizing that it is a way of viewing the world and representing the world that is just profoundly different from that of adults. Okay, we'll do it again. Thanks, Nora, for the beautiful picture. So can you tell me about this picture?
It has hearts and you.
Okay, well, where's me? You point to me, okay? Because I'm going to share this with my students. So that's me.
Yeah.
Okay, and where's the hearts? Those are all the hearts. And what does it mean? Does it mean that you love me so much?
Yes.
Aw, that's so sweet. How old are you, Nora?
3.
3?
I
Wow.
think you know that.
You are amazing. What an artist. Thank you so much. So how old are you?
I'm 5.
5? Okay.
That's you.
Okay.
That's me.
Okay.
That's
Oh, wow.
and that's a heart with a
Okay.
golden
Oh, awesome.
fire.
Wow. Thank you so much. Now, wasn't that just absolutely sweet to get that kind of art from a couple of sweet little girls? Now, what we're going to do next is continue on and just explore a little bit more about the cognitive development that goes on in early childhood. Now, the word cognitive here is roughly equivalent to thought. So when we talk about cognitive development, this really means the development of thought, the intelligence, which is one aspect of thought, but it's also the ability to interact with the world, the ability to engage and process emotions. And Piaget regards the development of intelligence as an interaction between the individual's maturation and the child's social and physical environment. And so cognitive development, according to Piaget, takes place by means of 2 processes. First, there's organization, in which one psychological structure is integrated with another, and adaptation, in which psychological structures are modified in the course of interactions with the environment. And so adaptation consists of assimilation and accommodation. Individuals assimilate each new experience to what they already know, and at the same time they accommodate or modify what they know to take the new experience into account. And so the world is constantly changing, and according to Piaget, there are 4 stages of cognitive development that we need to kind of keep in mind. And we've explored the first stage already last week with the sensory motor stage, and that's essentially the stage from birth through to 2 years old. Then we have the pre-operational period, which is that time between the ages of 2 and 7. Then we have the period of concrete operations around the ages of 7 through to 11. And then we have the formal operations, which is around the age of 11 onwards. Now, what we're going to be doing today is focusing in on primarily on the early childhood period, where we are engaging with pre-operational thought. Now, the pre-operational stage is the significant step beyond the sensory motor period, because pre-operational children can learn not only by sensing and doing, but also by thinking symbolically. And not only by acting, but also by reflecting upon their actions. The major important development of the pre-operational stages is the symbolic function. And that's part of the reason why I wanted you to see how there's that rudimentary symbolic imagery going on within early childhood art, because it gives us a sense of just how primitive this symbolic function is. The symbolic function, though, is the ability to learn by using symbols. A symbol is a mental representation to which consciously and unconsciously a person has attached meaning. And it is something that stands for and really comes into its own in that age between 2 or 3 years old and 6 years old. And so you wouldn't expect a child prior to this stage to be reading, for example, because words are symbols. Now, symbols allow us to think about objects or events without actually having them in front of us. An object can be a symbol, taking on and into a person's mind the qualities of whatever it stands for. The most common symbol, and probably the most important one for thought, is the word. At first spoken and then written. So knowing the symbols for things helps us to think about them and to incorporate their qualities into our lives, to remember them, and then finally to communicate with other people about them. Symbolic thought is, therefore, a great advance over the sensory motor stage. And there are 3 ways in which children show the symbolic function. We have deferred imitation, symbolic play, and language. Now, with deferred imitation, this is imitation of an observed action after their time has passed. For example, Raju, who is age 3, sees his father shaving. Later, at his preschool, he heads for a play corner and begins to shave. Now, according to Piaget, Raju saw the shaving, formed and stored the mental symbol, probably a visual image, and later, when he could no longer see it, he produced the behavior by calling up this stored symbol. So that would be an example of deferred imitation. Then we have symbolic play. And this is when children make an object stand for something else. Shobha, aged 4, makes her finger stand for a bottle, and she feeds her doll by putting her finger to the doll's mouth. Now, her laughter as she does this shows that she knows her finger is not really a bottle, but she's having fun with it. And then there's language. And language is the symbolic function that is most impressive on language, obviously. The pre-operational children use language to stand for absent things and for events that are not taking place at the time, just like we all do. By using the word apple tree to stand for something that was not there, Shobha made an utterance with symbolic character. And within this pre-operational period of cognitive development, there begins to have these kinds of symbolic thinking, the deferred imitation, the symbolic play, and the use of language. But there are some significant limitations to pre-operational thought that we need to be mindful of. The way a early childhood child thinks is not the way we think. It's not the way we view the world, and there's a lot of limitations to the capacity. In some ways, of course, pre-operational thinking is really still rudimentary compared to what children will be able to do when they get to, say, for example, the concrete operation stage in middle childhood. So, for example, pre-operational children do not yet have the ability to clearly differentiate between reality and fantasy. Some of the limitations of the pre-operational thought are as follows. Centralization, that is, Pre-operational children tend to centrate. They tend to focus on one aspect of a situation and neglect others, often coming to illogical conclusions. They cannot decenter or think simultaneously about several aspects of a situation. They focus on just one aspect at a time. A classical example is Piaget's most famous experiment. He designed it to test children's development of conversation. The awareness that two things that are equal remain so if their shape is altered so that one is different from the other. And if the shape is altered, the child will think that the value has been taken away. He found that children do not fully understand this principle until they reach the concrete operation stage. So normally, this happens in middle childhood. So pre-operational children cannot consider height and width at the same time. They center on one aspect or the other, and so cannot understand what is happening. Say, for example, if you have a tall glass that is narrow and a low glass that is wide, the volume is the same, but pre-operational child will not recognize that. They will focus on just one aspect. For example, they will think the tall glass has more water in it because it's higher. Their logic is flawed because their thinking is tied to what they see. If one glass looks bigger, higher, they seem to think it's bigger. And then there's irreversibility, which is another limitation of pre-operational thinking. Pre-operational children's logic is limited by this irreversibility. That is, there is a failure to understand that an operation can go two ways. A child can conceptualize restoring the original state of the water by pouring it back in another glass. They can't do that. He or she will realize that the amount of water in both the glasses is the same. But the proportional pre-operational child does not realize this, whereas a concrete operational child will. They focus just on one state rather than on the transformation that takes place. So you can kind of think of pre-operational children as watching a film strip where they're looking at static frames, and they don't realize that they can move from one direction or the other. And that's kind of what I want you to kind of be mindful of here. One example of this is in the art that I showed you earlier. I'm a fairly tall fellow. And if you notice there, one of the pictures of me has that really long neck. And she was focusing on very clearly the fact that, she likes to tell her friends that I am a giant, that she has a friend that's a giant. And so she was trying to clearly express that in her picture. And that's the kind of thing that you see with pre-operational children. So those are some examples of what we can recognize and look for in early childhood cognitive development, is that whole pre-operational phase. Okay, I just want to take a little bit of time now and close out this lecture by talking a little bit about Erik Erikson's views of early childhood. So if you recall, the very first stage within Erik Erikson's development is that age of infancy, so from birth through to about 18 months, is that first stage of trust versus mistrust. And then through the 2s and 3s, you have a stage known as autonomy versus shame and doubt. We'll just touch on that a little bit because that kind of touches on getting into that early childhood stage. And then the primary stage that we see in that preschool years through from 3 to 5 is initiative versus guilt. So let's look at stage 2 of autonomy versus shame and doubt. That's the second stage of Erikson's theory of psychosocial development, and that takes place during early childhood and is focused on children developing a greater sense of personal control. And there's a role here of having them learn some independence. At this point in development, the children are just starting to gain a little bit of independence. And they're starting to perform basic actions on their own and making simple decisions about what they prefer. By allowing kids to make choices and gain control, parents and caregivers can help their child to develop a sense of autonomy. One of the things that come along these lines is potty training, and the essential theme of this stage is that children need to develop a sense of personal control over their physical skills and a sense of independence, and potty training plays really an important role in helping children develop this sense of autonomy. So like Freud, Erikson believed that toilet training was a vital part of this process. However, Erikson's reasoning was quite different from that of Freud, where Freud believed that it was a source of pleasure to be able to evacuate the bowels. Erikson believes that learning to control one's bodily functions leads to a feeling of control and a sense of independence. Other important events include more control over the food choices, the kinds of toys that they like to play with, and their clothing selection. And the outcome of this stage, the ideal outcome here, is that, while children may struggle and who are shamed for their accidents may be left with without a sense really of personal control. But when they do succeed, and when those successes are celebrated during this stage of psychosocial development, it leads to a feeling of autonomy. So failure and shaming leads to feelings of shame and doubt, whereas success and rewards lead to a feeling of autonomy and independence. So it's important really here to find a balance. Children who successfully complete this stage are going to feel secure and confident, while those who are not successful and are left with a sense of inadequacy, then they tend to be plagued with self-doubt. And Erikson believed that achieving a balance between autonomy and shame and doubt really will lead to will, which is the belief that children can act with intention within reason and limits. Then we come to the predominant stage of early childhood, according to Erikson, which would be the later stage of early childhood, which is initiative versus guilt. And this is the third stage of psychosocial development that takes place during those preschool years. And at this point in psychosocial development, children begin to assert their power and control over the world through directing play and other social interactions. So children who are successful at this stage feel capable and are able to lead others. And those who fail to acquire these skills are left with a sense of guilt, a sense of self-doubt, and a lack of initiative. So there's some outcomes here. The major theme of the third stage of psychosocial development is that children need to begin asserting control and power over the environment. Success in this stage leads to a sense of purpose. Children who try to exert too much power experience disapproval, resulting in a sense of guilt. When an ideal balance of individual initiative and the willingness to work with others is achieved, the ego quality known as purpose begins to emerge. And it's here where we find that if we encourage a child to have initiative and encourage a child to develop their autonomy, then we have a child that is willing to engage the world and willing to learn and develop, and that is truly what we are looking for within this stage. Hope you enjoyed this week. You take care. Bye-bye.